A leader can be deeply admired and still become dangerous to the institution around them. To leadership, law, and lightwork. I'm Marcia Narine Weldon. This is a show where we study how the brain, the body, and belief patterns shape the way you lead, decide, and show up when it really matters. Each week you'll get the Leadership Lab, the Brief, the Legal Blind Spot, and the Toolkit Take. Let's get started. So according to the 2026 Edelman Trust Barometer, 78% of employees say they trust their employer to do what's right. That is a remarkable number. It's also the kind of number that can make leaders lazy if they hear it the wrong way. Most people hear that and think, leadership must be doing fine. I hear a different question. What exactly are people trusting? Are they trusting character, judgment, consistency? Or are they trusting the story they've been handed about what the company stands for? Are they trusting the leader in front of them or their own need to believe somebody's in charge? Trust is one of those words people use as if it's automatically virtuous, and it's not. Trust can be wise, and it can be earned. It could also be inherited, projected, or built on a polished story that no one's even tested yet. You don't know what kind of trust you have when things are smooth. You find out when the facts get really messy, when there's a mistake, when a cost shows up, or when a leader asks for patience while avoiding candor. And that's when trust stops being branding and turns into leadership. I'm interested in trust as a stress test. I want to know what survives the moment when a leader has to tell the truth that may cost them the admiration, the momentum, the money, or the control. So a lot of people think that trustworthy leadership is about confidence, vision, knowing how to sound reassuring under pressure. Now, those things help, right? But they're not enough. A leader can be calm and still be evasive. A leader can be visionary and still distort the truth. A leader can be brilliant in making people feel heard and still leave them carrying different versions of reality. A leader can be deeply admired and still become dangerous to the institution around them. That same trait, the traits that help a person rise, can make them hard to challenge once they're at the top. So confidence can make other people second guess their own instincts. The skill in reading a room can turn into skill in telling each audience what it wants to hear. Mission language can start protecting the leader from ordinary scrutiny instead of protecting the mission itself. And this is one of the oldest patterns in leadership. Someone becomes central to the story, and people start protecting the story. They edit themselves. They tell part of the truth, but not all of it. They wait for that better moment. They decide not to be difficult. They tell themselves they need one more data point before they say the thing that might break that spell that the leader casts. And that is how trust changes shape. On paper, it still looks strong. In the room, it gets a little bit thinner. So you see it when people stop disagreeing in real time and they save their opinion for the hallway. You see it when reassurance rises and candor starts to disappear. That is why, do people trust me? Is not a serious enough leadership question. The better one is, what is that trust built on? Is it built on people knowing they can bring bad news to you directly and early? Is it built on consistency between your private behavior and your public language? Is it built on the experience that people have of watching you choose truth over optics when you didn't have to do so? And there's another layer here. Leaders often think trust is something they generate in other people. More often, this system is building trust around them in ways they may not even see. Teams decide what can be said. Boards decide what can be challenged. Institutions decide whether the myth around the leader matters more than the feedback loop around the leader. So this issue is not just whether a leader is trustworthy. So I want you to think about the issue being whether the structure around that leader can still tell the truth. Can the direct report say, I think you're missing something? Can the board member say, this explanation does not hold up? Can someone tell the leader the truth before the truth becomes a headline, a lawsuit, or a very expensive lesson? So a leader who can tolerate that is much more trustworthy than a leader who can deliver the flawless message. A leader who can hear that challenge without treating it as some kind of betrayal is much more trustworthy than the one who can command the room. So trust is built when people see that you are safer with the truth than you are with the story you've been telling. So here's the question to carry into the week when the facts get uncomfortable. Do the people around you become more honest or more careful? That answer tells you almost everything you need to know. Now, everything I just described in this abstract way makes the brief that I'm going to talk to you about more concrete. There is a leader who scored extraordinarily high on every traditional trust signal. vision, fundraising talent, the ability to read a room, a mission that carried world-class talent. We're going to look at what happened when the structure around him lost the ability to tell the truth. That's the Leadership Lab, so now let's get to the brief. And I have two sources this week, and they do more work together than either one does on its own. The first is Karen Howe's 2025 book, Empire of AI. Loved this book. And the second is a New Yorker investigation by Ronan Farrow and Andrew Morantz called Can Sam Altman Be Trusted? Yes, Sam Altman of OpenAI. So one is about systems, the other is about a person, but they land in the same place. I'm not covering these because I want you to walk away with some hotter take on AI. I'm covering them because the leadership failures in this story are patterns I recognize from boardrooms, startups, law firms, and coaching engagements. The technology is just the backdrop. The real lessons are about trust, governance, mission, and what happens when no one in the room is willing to say, this is not right, to the person with the most power. So let me give you some perspective before we begin. I am an AI realist. I helped train one of the large AI models on legal reasoning and accuracy. It's a model you've heard of. I've taught ethics and technology, worked on algorithmic bias, spoken on technology and human rights, and advised on AI governance. So I am not reacting to headlines here. I'm talking about a system I know from the inside. So here's 10 takeaways from Empire of AI and the New Yorker article. 1, your founding story is a contract, whether you filed it or not. According to Howe's reporting, Altman launched OpenAI as a safety-first nonprofit, in part because he could not match Google's compensation. So he competed on mission. Come save humanity, and it worked. World-class researchers left Google to join. Then the bottleneck shifted from talent to capital, and the mission shifted with it. A for-profit entity was nested inside the nonprofit. Billions came in, and Howe argues that the original safety mission was never entirely pure. It also functions as a strategic narrative to recruit people Altman could not otherwise afford. So if you are a founder, hear this. The story you tell your first 10 hires lives in their bodies. When you outgrow it without telling them, they don't just feel disappointed, they feel deceived, and they're right. 2, telling every room what it wants to hear is a skill that's got a shelf life. The New Yorker reporters did not find one dramatic reason behind the reason that the board fired Altman in 2023. They found a pattern. One member described it as an almost sociopathic lack of concern for the consequences that may come from deceiving someone. Altman told Congress that AI could destroy civilization. He told investors it would capture all economic value in the solar system. He told recruits they were joining a humanitarian project. Each version landed in the room where it was delivered, and none of them could survive contact with the others. So if you run a team, a firm, or anything else, adjusting your tone for different audiences is a skill. Adjusting the substance is where the problem comes. Third lesson, small lies rehearse big ones. The New Yorker reporting includes small inconsistencies that sound really trivial until you see the pattern they belong to. And that is how trust erodes. It doesn't always collapse in one giant cinematic moment. It weakens through repeated contact with someone whose relationship to the truth feels loose. So when someone is inconsistent about things that carry no real stakes, that's not always quirky. Sometimes it's rehearsal for their sociopathic lying. Fourth, feeling governed and being governed are not the same thing. OpenAI had a non-profit board. It had safety protocols. It had oversight mechanisms. And according to Howe, when the board exercised actual oversight by firing Altman, he mobilized investors and employees to reverse it within days. The board was gutted. The New Yorker reports that the outside investigation produced no written report, a move that also has consequences for transparency and liability. So if the guardrails in your organization only work when the most powerful person in the room agrees to respect them, those are not guardrails. Those are decorations. Fifth lesson. When the people closest to the money start using certain names, listen. According to Howe's reporting, a Microsoft executive compared Altman to a Bernie Madoff or a Sam Bankman-Fried level scammer. Not a competitor, not a critic on the internet, a Microsoft executive. When your most important business partner is privately using names like that, that's not gossip. That is an internal risk assessment. And this applies to any organization. When the people with the deepest visibility into the numbers start whispering, the leadership problem is already advanced. 6, every high-growth organization externalizes costs somewhere. The question is where you've looked. According to Howe's investigation, workers in Kenya were paid a few dollars an hour to label graphic violence, sexual abuse, and some of the worst material on the internet so the product could feel clean and safe to Western consumers. Those workers described lasting psychological harm. At the same time, data centers were drawing on public drinking water in drought-prone regions of Chile and Uruguay. This is not only an AI problem. Any company that scales fast is pushing costs somewhere. Do you know where your growth is landing? Do you know who absorbs the price of your speed? If the answer is, I haven't checked, that is not efficiency. That is a choice that you're making not to know. 7, if your product has no fixed definition, you can never be held accountable for it. OpenAI's ultimate product, artificial general intelligence, has no agreed upon scientific definition. According to Howe, that is not an oversight. It is part of the strategy. For regulators, AGI may be a threat requiring some oversight. For investors, it's a revenue engine. For the public, Altman has described it as something that could cure cancer and solve climate change. For the company's own corporate definition, according to the reporting, it's systems that outperform humans in most economically valuable work. That is far different, and that's 4 different promises sold under one name. So any leader who keeps success vague has built a system where they cannot fail, and no one can hold them to a specific outcome. So if your team cannot tell you what done looks like, what the metrics are, you don't have a vision. You basically have some kind of fog. 8th lesson, fear is not a strategy. According to Howe, tech companies lobbied politicians with the specter of an AR arms race with China to block domestic regulation. The pitch was simple. Slow us down and the enemy will win. Altman himself, the reporting shows, encouraged heavy regulation under one administration and then pivoted to deregulation under the next administration, depending on which stance served his competitive position. So leaders in every industry use some version of this. If we don't move tomorrow, the competition will eat us. And sometimes that's true, but more often it's a way to shut down internal dissent and skip the due diligence that would slow everything down. So when someone frames urgency as survival, ask for the evidence behind that deadline. 9th lesson, when your most credible people raise alarms about leadership, listen before they leave. According to the New Yorker article, Ilya Sutskever, OpenAI's chief scientist and co-founder, concluded that Altman could not be, quote, entrusted with world-altering technology. He reportedly worried that Altman should not have his finger on the button. So when the most technically credible person in the building tells you the person running it should not be running it, that is not a personality clash. That is a structural warning. And this travels beyond OpenAI. When your best people start raising alarms about the leaders and the leadership, you got to listen before they leave, because they usually leave before the institution understands what it has lost. And then the final lesson, there is always another way to build. According to Howe, a Maori nonprofit radio station in New Zealand built a high-performing speech recognition tool to preserve an endangered language. They didn't scrape the internet to do this. They didn't scrape data. They asked community elders for permission. They secured informed consent. They educated people about how the data would be protected. They built with care and with a fraction of the resources that Silicon Valley insists are necessary. So when someone tells you there's only one way to build, one speed to grow, or one price to pay, they are usually describing their own preferences and their own biases. They are not describing your constraint. So the single most important idea across both sources is this: the most dangerous thing a leader can sell is inevitability. This is the only way. We had no choice. The market demanded it. Every extraction, Howe documents, was a decision. Every governance failure the New Yorker uncovered was a decision. Every alternative in these pieces reminds you that different decisions produce different outcomes. And this is true whether you're running a tech company, a law firm, a nonprofit, or a team of 12. That's the brief. Now let's go to the legal blind spot. Here's your issue. I'm just going to stick with AI for this one. AI desktop tools that can read, edit, and organize files on your local machine. And here's why I need you to think about it if you're a professional with confidentiality obligations. You've got to pause before using them. I use all the large language models as part of my work. I am not anti-AI, but I am a lawyer and I'm really hesitant to use any tool that has autonomous access to my calendar, my emails, my local files. So if you're a lawyer, a therapist, a coach, an accountant, a financial advisor, or anyone holding other people's confidential information, I think hesitation is the correct response. So there's AI tools that basically let you point the system at a folder on your computer, describe what you need, and the AI handles it autonomously. This is fantastic, right? It can read your files, it can edit them, it can create new ones, it can organize them. So for someone drowning in admin, this sounds like a huge gift. But for anyone with confidentiality obligations, it could be a huge risk, and you need to understand it before you use it. So here's what most people get wrong. They evaluate these tools based on whether the company behind them seems trustworthy. And that is the wrong question. The real question is whether the architects and the architecture can hold up against adversarial attack. And right now, across the industry, that's not fully resolved. Security research has demonstrated that attackers can basically embed hidden instructions inside ordinary-looking document instructions. And these instructions silently direct the AI to extract confidential files without the user even knowing. The technical term is prompt injection. The plain English version, someone hides a command inside a PDF. You ask your AI assistant to review that PDF, and the assistant follows the hidden command instead of yours. So some of these vulnerabilities have been partially patched. So I'm not saying it's all tragedy, but the underlying architectural problem, prompt injection combined with broad file access, remains an open issue. And at least one major AI company has publicly acknowledged it cannot remotely shut down its tool mid-operation and advises against using it for anything that has sensitive data. So now think about what sits on your machine. Think about what you're doing if you're a practicing attorney, your client communications, your draft contracts, privileged strategy memos. If you're a therapist, you've got your session notes. If you're a financial advisor, you've got account details, tax returns, estate plans. Your ethical obligations don't care about how convenient the tool you're using. Bar associations, licensing board, HIPAA regulators, they care about whether you took reasonable steps to protect that information. So giving an AI tool that basic autonomous access to folders containing your client data when the developers themselves are still working out the kinks, that's going to be very hard to defend as reasonable. So before you use any AI tool that touches your local files, ask 3 questions. Number 1, can this tool be manipulated by the content inside the documents it reads? Does the tool have access to the internet or external APIs while it's also reading my files? And has the developer explicitly stated that this product is safe for use with confidential professional data? If the answer to the first 2 is a yes and the answer to the third is a no, you already have your answer. So if anything in today's legal blind spot raised a question about your specific situation, that's when you talk to a lawyer in your state. I'm a lawyer, but I'm not your lawyer. Okay? And by the way, the legal blind spot is brought to you by Legally Lucid, a just-in-time business protection resource for founders and businesses who want to make sure that they understand where they're protected, where they might be exposed, and what needs attention. So join the email list at legallylucid.com for weekly tips and a deeper dive. Finally, today's toolkit. The toolkit take is about the weight of what you are not saying. So your nervous system treats withheld truth as unfinished business. Your body carries what you're not saying, whether you're fully aware of it or not. So earlier in the episode, I said that trust is built when people see you are safer with the truth than you are with the story. And that sounds really good in theory. The harder question is whether it's true in your actual life. Think of one thing you know to be true right now about your work, your team, your leadership, your family, that you haven't said to the person who needs to hear it the most. Write that sentence down. Don't improve it. Don't make it prettier than it is. Write down the true sentence. Then ask yourself, why haven't you said it? And maybe you have a good reason for waiting. Timing might actually matter. More information might be needed. You might be trying to avoid saying something carelessly. I get all of that. All of that is possible. But still, I want you to ask a harder question. Underneath those explanations, what are you protecting by staying quiet? Maybe you're protecting your image as the reasonable one. Maybe you're protecting the relationship. Maybe you're trying to preserve momentum. Maybe you're holding on to the hope that the problem will get smaller if you leave it alone for just another week. Now ask, what is that protection costing you? What is the silence doing to your self-respect? What is it doing to your leadership? What is it doing to the people around you who already know something is off? That's the part people skip. They think a lot about the risk of speaking, and they don't think enough about the cost of staying silent. So once you have your sentence, I want you to read it out loud and then ask yourself one more question. If I said this plainly, what am I afraid would happen next? And be honest with yourself. You might be worried that the other person is going to be hurt. You may be worried that they'll get defensive or offended. You may be worried that once you say the true thing out loud, the easier story will no longer be available to you. And that's a real fear. It's also useful. It tells you where the pressure is. Now ask the question that I actually care about. What would it look like in this situation to be safer with the truth than with the story? I'm not asking what would sound smartest or what would make everybody comfortable. I'm asking what honesty would require. Because sometimes leadership has very little to do with perfect wording. Sometimes it's the decision to let reality back in the room before the damage gets worse. So this week, I want you to take on one true sentence that you've been avoiding and decide whether the silence is still worth that price. So this episode has been brought to you by Illuminating Wisdom. Subscribe at illuminatingwisdom.com to get the newsletter to be the first to hear when the Illuminated Wisdom Toolkit is available. It's going to include more than 100 tools to help you regulate your nervous system under pressure, notice your default patterns before they take over, and build a kind of capacity that lets you lead without running yourself into the ground. This is not about spa language or performative self-care. It's about capacity, judgment, and the ability to stay steady when your decisions affect other people. The link is in the show notes. So I want you to take what you learned today and let it shape how you lead, how you choose, and how you move through the world. I'll see you next time.